Joined by head coach Pedro Arruza of Randolph-Macon College football. They were picked number 5 in this year's preseason poll. Coach, let's talk a little bit about what we saw last year. First to start up, we had 4 teams tied at the top. We've seen it before. Right. In 2008, I believe, was the last time. But this one was one where we also had the teams that were below that top 4 affecting the games. Case in point, what happened with your squad in the last game of the year against Hampton-Sydney. Talk a little bit about what we saw last year, what came out, and just where the ODAC was at that point.
Yeah, I think it's the same thing that we talk about every year. I mean, there's a lot of good football teams in this league, a lot of good football players, a lot of good coaching. I mean, you know that you've got to be prepared every week. You know the coaches do a great job of preparing and getting their teams ready to play. So, you know, I think the bottom line is you've got to be ready to play every week. And, you know, there were a lot of close games in the league. I mean, there were a couple games that we were involved with that could have gone either way. And I think you've got to get ready for much of the same this year. I think you've got a lot of those teams bringing back a lot of their key players. And, you know, even though we lost quite a bit from last year in terms of, you know, losing our 4-year starter quarterback and losing a couple of defensive starters that were key guys and losing Mike Doe, our best wide receiver, you know, I feel like we're going to be competitive again this year. And, you know, we're going to be able to be right there in the mix, I hope.
Well, we'll start right there on that side of the ball that you alluded to, or offensive side. Quarterback is most people say that it's a quarterback-centric sport. You know, the quarterback runs it anymore, although obviously it needs to run hand-in-hand with everything else you do. It can't just be one person. But you did graduate a 4-year starting quarterback. What's the plan coming in for this season? Yeah,
I mean, we have 5 guys that are going to compete for the position in camp. 2 of them were here in the spring, and then we have 3 incoming freshmen that we're really excited about. You know, nobody separated themselves in the spring. You know, we thought coming out of the spring we might have a guy that we could tab as a starter going into the fall, but you know, we told the freshmen that they were going to have an opportunity to compete, and I'm pretty happy with these guys. I mean, they were up for our quarterback camp, worked the entire week, and I was really, you know, just in terms of their presence and their work ethic, the kind of young men that they are, I think they're going to bring a lot of things to the table. So I'm not really sure who our quarterback's going to be. One of the disadvantages that we have is we don't have an extensive spring period to practice in pads and be able to really determine some of those things. And we have a very short window to work with in the preseason. But I'm confident that out of that group of 5, we're going to find somebody that is going to be a competitor and somebody that's going to help us move the program forward. You know, 4 years ago we were in the same spot, didn't really have any idea who our quarterback was going to be. Zach came in and was a 4-year starter. We won 8 games his freshman year. And, you know, we're very competitive in the 2 games that we lost and could have very easily been 10-0 that year. So, you know, as long as they're talented, which I think they are, and I think as long as they're good human beings, which I know they are, you know, you're going to have a shot. So, you know, it's going to be a young position, and, you know, there's going to be a lot of growing pains, but I'm really excited about the material that we have to work with at that position.
One of the places you have undoubtedly fewer questions is with your running game. Not just do you have John Bird back, who was a second-teamer all-conference last year, but you've got several offensive linemen back. A couple of them were also all-conference linemen. Talk a little bit about what you expect for your running game this season.
Yeah, I'd say one of the things that's a real key in our program is we try to build our program around the offensive and defensive lines. And I'm really excited about the guys that we have coming back. You know, last year we had a lot of injuries, so a lot of guys played. You know, we had really 2 offensive linemen that were able to start every football game for us last year. So we have 3 guys that started and played a lot of football for us and have played a lot of football for us. Nate Turner is going into his 5th year. He had a year that he missed because of an injury, and he's going to be a 4-year starter. Nick Powell's going to be a 4-year starter. Thomas Morset is going into his senior year. He missed a good part of his freshman year, but he was a guy that started for us as a freshman. So we have a lot of guys with experience coming back up front. We have Stephen Quinn, our tight end. He's obviously a key cog in that, you know, whole deal with the way that we run the football. But, you know, I feel good about it. I think what we need to do is establish some depth at running back. John Bird shouldered most of the carries last year, and I think that for us to be a better football team and a better offense, we're going to have to find some guys that can relieve him a little bit and tote the ball a little bit, you know, and who that's going to be, you know, is really a question mark. You know, it's going to depend on who comes back in condition. It's going to depend on some of the guys that are coming in that freshman class. But I feel good about the potential that our offensive line has.
Flipping sides to the other side of the ball, going over to the defense, you mentioned the lines. So we were on the offensive line. Talk to me a little bit about what you expect from your defensive front.
Yeah, I mean, we lost 2 key guys in Calvin Davis and Tom Solak. I mean, Tom Solak, again, was a guy that played a lot of football for 4 years, had a tremendous motor. I mean, Calvin Davis was a super talented football player. We lost Danny Hunt, who started in our secondary for 3 years. But other than that, we have a lot of experience back. You know, our secondary is I'd say loaded from the standpoint of experience. I mean, we have 5 guys coming back that have started since they were freshmen. Some of them have been starting for, going into their 4th year. Some have been starting for 2 years. But regardless, there's a lot of experience returning in the secondary. You have 4 linebackers that have all started a game. So there's going to be a lot of competition on both sides of the ball. And I think the message that I've sent to our football team, especially after the kind of year that we had from a wins and losses standpoint last year, is it's going to be a tough camp. It's going to be a very competitive camp. Every position is going to be up for grabs. I'm not really concerned about what guys have done in the past, how many games they've started, whether they were all conference or not. Everybody's going to have to compete for a job. Everybody's going to have to compete for playing time. They're going to have to work to earn a job, and then they're going to have to work to stay on the field, because we're going to make it as competitive as we can make it.
One of the things that comes with that competition and the work is coaching philosophies about what you're looking to do with your programs. You change things up, you tweak things up for personnel, but you have some basic key tenets of what you do. You have a defensive pedigree, and your defensive have always been very good. In the ODAC, you face a lot of varied offenses. You have the option at WNL. You have up-tempo from Shenandoah and E&H. You have programs like yours, which is more of a ground and pound a little bit, and then some balanced offense. What is the chore and the task of having to go from one week to another and probably not facing the same offense from week to week?
Well, I think it definitely poses a challenge. I mean, you've got to have players that are adaptable. I mean, you can't just have guys that 280 pounds playing on the defensive line, because you're going to be facing some different kinds of teams. You've got to be able to stop the run. You've got to be able to rush the passer. You've got to have linebackers that are adaptable. Some weeks we're going to see a lot of passing. Some weeks, teams are going to run it at you a little bit more. So I think you've got to have the ability to have a flexible scheme and be able to adapt from week to week. I mean, it's a big change going from playing Washington and Lee and then turning around and playing Guilford. That Guilford game has always been a challenge for us, and I think a big part of that is, you go from preparing for the option to then turning around and having to play a team like Guilford that's spreading it out and, actually doing a pretty decent job of running the football. I think they do a great job of creating balance in their offense. And like I said, we've got a lot of good coaches in the league. They do a great job of taking advantage of mismatches. And, I think from my standpoint, I still believe that it comes down to being able to run the football. And I think a lot of that comes from my defensive background. You've got to be able to control the football. I know that's kind of an old school thought in today's day and age, but I think it's important. I think time of possession is an important statistic. I think you've got to be able to control the tempo of a game. And, like I tell our coaches and players all the time, there's nothing more demoralizing than lining up and having somebody just pound the ball at you. So, having the ability to do that and then being able to turn around on on defense and stopping the run, I think is a huge component in being able to win games and keeping games close and being able to pull games out at the end. I mean, over the years, if you look at a lot of the big games that we've played in, we've had games where maybe we gave up 300 yards of passing and still won the game, and maybe even won the game by a significant margin. But we've never given up 300 yards of rushing and come out on top. That's a tough deal. So still believe you've got to stop the run and really design your defense and gear your defense towards that. And I think a lot of that starts in the preseason with the way that you prepare your football team. I mean, if you're throwing the ball around, a bunch during the preseason and all you're doing is lining up in 4 wide receiver sets, I know a lot of people have success with that, and but it's not something that I believe in and subscribe to. I think you've got to build a tough football team during camp, and part of the way that you do that is by running an isolation play and being physical in practice, and that benefits your offense, but it always benefits your defense as well. And my mentor, one of my mentors, Larry Kimbom, the guy that I coached with at Washington University, I coached defense. He was the head football coach. One of the things that he picked up from being a graduate assistant for Woody Hayes at Ohio State is he said, no matter what we're doing by design on offense, we're always going to have an isolation play. We're always going to have an ISO play. And I think for him that was just a mentality thing, building a mentality in your offense, but also having your linebackers having to fit that up in practice, I think develops a certain mindset in your football players. And, you can talk about talent, you can talk about, a lot of different things, but I think at the end of the day, you got to have a tough football team if you want to compete from week to week, and you got to be able to lean into adversity and fight through adversity. And tough kids and tough football players do that. And yeah, I feel like the things that we do in our running game and the things that we do defensively to scheme against the run really help promote that mentality within our players and within our program.
Well, Coach, I want to thank you for joining me today. Good luck this season.
Yeah, thank you very much.